We know why the Jedi transitioned away from wearing armor, but what about the Sith? Well, the reasoning for the Sith, my dear friends, is extremely interesting. Welcome back to the archives, and today we'll be taking a look at why the Sith abandoned armor, specifically why Darth Sidious never wore armor, until his very last form. Most of the time when we conjure an image of a classic Sith Lord, we see a dark figure obscured in a black robe head to foot. Thanks to Darth Sidious, and many Sith like him, these monk-like robes contrast the Jedi, as this became the normal attire for the Jedi and the Sith. But at once, the Sith had a lot more fashion and style in the timeline, typically sporting elaborate suits of armor. From the very ancient days of the Golden Age of the Sith Empire, all the way until the time of Darth Bane, Sith Lords could be seen wearing at least pieces of armor, along with their dark robes. But with the instillment of the Rule of Two, this stopped completely. While the answer may seem obvious at first, nothing with the Sith is as it seems. So in today's holocron, we are going to analyze the significance of Sith armor and touch on Jedi armor to juxtapose their individual reasons for taking it off for 1,000 years, only to eventually put their armor back on. Now, my friends, let's get into it. To start, let's get the obvious out of the way. Some may point to the more practical reasons for Sith laying down their armor during the Rule of Two, that being since the Sith weren't in combat during the 1,000-year hideout, that they wouldn't need any such bodily protection. Same would be true with the Jedi, who believed that their dark side enemies were finally extinct. But Sith armor seems to be much more about their culture than just keeping them safe in battle, and in fact, when Darth Sidious was resurrected during the Dark Empire saga, he would later don a suit of armor of his very own, breaking the long-standing tradition set in place by the Rule of Two. But of course, we'll get into why he did this later. It should be noted that Force wielders wearing armor is always more about making a statement than actually having protection. I'm sure we don't need to tell you that armor doesn't exactly protect one from lightsaber blades, at least not specifically tailored armor. The Jedi and Sith weren't regularly forging their suits out of Beskar or some saber-resistant alloy. By analyzing the Old Republic holovids, we can turn to Jedi like the Battlemaster Cal Sanderic, Van Zalo, Satil Shan, and then the armor of the Sith Marauders for proof of this. So, if they were ineffective against lightsabers though, why did the Sith and Jedi wear them at all? The most important things to keep in mind when discussing Sith apparel is firstly symbolism, and secondly, cultural or historical context. With symbolism, many Sith wear armor to enhance their intimidating presence. It not only symbolizes their power and dominance, but also their reach. Sith like Darth Maul, who rarely ever see battle, would never be seen without wearing his classic spiky armor when sitting upon the Dark Council throne. Everyone feared him because of the mystique of his look and the power that came with it. The psychological effects of a suit of armor is one of the most subtle manipulations that the Sith would use to impact the world around them. It was a sign to other Sith Lords that they were a worthy challenge, and that they had gained their position for a reason. Even if they did not fight, did not mean that they would never. Tall spikes, broad shoulders, a frightening faceplate, and a metal chest all give off an illusion of invincibility. Even so much as a mask could make this impression, with something like Revan, which he used to his advantage. Even Mitra Surik mentioned how he looked almost inhuman with his mask on, that when Revan put it on, he became something more. Without seeing Revan's face, without seeing his expressions, his emotions, to his enemies, Revan appeared and was described as undefeatable. Others like Sidious or Plagueis, or even the Old Republic Sith, wore more traditional Sith robes and cloaks, which were meant to reflect wisdom and a mastery of the Force, that there was something deeper going on shrouded in the darkness. A ceremonial appearance gives off the impression that the Sith is older than time itself. No secrets of the dark side that most beings could only dream of. Plagueis once mentioned how the cloaks and cowls were meant to make them look like creatures of the night, a direct quote. Wraith-like beings that were immortal in their ideology, undying in their purpose. The point being that the clothes were meant to be statements for the Sith, their personality, and their approach to the Force. An armored Sith Lord could rely on being more hands-on in dealing with their enemy. They'll usually take out their lightsaber, enjoy slaying their enemies down, and besting them in combat. The Sith will be most often seen at the helm of a starship, making battle plans, or harnessing their rage into physical power. A robed Dark Lord will prove their status over a foe by utilizing Force-based attacks. You'll find them in libraries, laboratories, or political spheres, manipulating those around them, studying the most depraved depths of the Force. It's important to remember that being a Sith isn't just an alignment in the Force, it's a religion. And those who are religious will wear things simply for ceremonial value, even if no one sees or understands their deeper meaning. The purposes of their attire are important to only the Sith wearing them. This is why we see Palpatine wearing a robe covered with Sith symbols when he is finally addressing the Senate after the Jedi assassination attempt. Palpatine has finally won, and the Sith robes symbolize his ascension, his break from hiding. Even if he himself wasn't publicly announcing that he was a Sith, Sidious wore red robes with Sith symbols as a message to himself and the galaxy. Onto historical and cultural context though, Sith have been wearing armor for tens of thousands of years, long before they were ever discovered by the Dark Jedi exiles, who turned them into a religion. King Adis is one of the first recorded Sith to ever wear an entire suit of battle armor. This of course would have protected him against bladed weapons of that day. But when the Dark Jedi took over and introduced lightsaber technology to the Sith, armor developed from that point forward would have been far less effective and nearly obsolete. This was the case for most ancient Jedi and blaster technology as well, as the Jedi were forced to adapt. However, the Sith continued to wear their armor, with the Junta Pal's Dark Jedi deciding to carry on this legacy of the ancient Sith kings. Tula Kord was most famous for a set of unique armor. The armor of Horde, the Lord of Hate, was carried into countless battles, but at the time, the armor was meant to signify power, dominance. Despite the fact that their metal coverings were no match for lightsaber blades, the Sith pure-blooded species associated it with rulership because of King Adis. The Dark Jedi merged with the Sith species and adopted these customs, which would be passed down through the generations of Sith moving forward. During the Golden Age of the Sith, Marka Ragnos, Naga Sadow, and Ludo Kresh wore golden armor coverings and large pieces of jewelry to indicate that they had wealth and power. It also put them on full display, their status, and their abilities in the Force. What we mean is, their armor was often reinforced by dark side magic, as they were more than just mere trinkets. Naga Sadow's amulet was actually a shoulder pauldron connected to a gauntlet by a chain, and had the ability to enhance the dark side within the wearer, to focus it like a magnifying glass. Utilizing it at its full ability allowed the wearer to fire beams of pure dark side energy. Ludo Kresh once fashioned an enchanted gauntlet for his son, which made him nigh immortal. The enchantment was that no one could touch the wearer without their permission, thus literally making him invincible so long as he wore it. These enchantments were not only the benefit of the master, but to put on full display the power that these Dark Lords wielded, and what they could achieve with dark magic. Only other Sith Lords who were versed in magic could sense or understand the power of these objects, making them a very niche status symbol. Making them out of expensive metals and precious stones represented the wealth that they lived in, the prosperity of a great golden empire. But what made them truly terrifying was that they were functional. During this period of time, the Sith were not even at war with the Jedi yet, so their armor was meant to send messages to fellow Dark Lords who would attempt to undermine them. In the later days of the Old Republic era, Sith began wearing much more practical suits of armor. Revan and Malak carried over their clothes from the days of Jedi soldiers into the Mandalorian Wars, but the Sith would exchange the colors for darker hues. Revan wore his mask to represent his vow of vengeance in honor of the woman that the mask had once belonged to, a female Mandalorian who stood against her brothers as they massacred an innocent populace. For the large part of the galaxy's history, armor was in vogue with both the Jedi and Sith to represent a declaration of war. It was a statement that they were ready to be knights of their individual factions, but this would all end with Darth Bane. We must now jump over to the Jedi and the juxtaposition. The Order of the Jedi and the light side's relationship with armor has always been extremely complicated. Jedi were never intended to be soldiers or to wear pieces as status symbols. They were keepers of the peace, which meant negotiation and meditation before combat. Armor, in a way, was the very antithesis of what the Jedi were supposed to be. Even with the Jedi Order when facing the Rakata, they seldom wore armor. The first time in recorded history that the entire Jedi Order as an establishment developed a suit of Jedi-specific armor was during the Pius Deu crisis of the year 10,000 BBY. The Pius Dea crisis is very complicated, so we won't explain the entire thing today, but to summarize, in the Senate, it was discovered that the Supreme Chancellor had been taken over by a human-centric cult, and that they were using the armies of the Republic to oppress and carry out genocide against non-human species across the galaxy. One of the first Jedi Grandmasters, Biel Doctaves, ordered the Jedi to take up arms on behalf of the alien innocents. The Jedi would don suits of armor, including helmets, and fought against the corrupt Republic army. They continued until their Grand Master exposed the Supreme Chancellor and took control of the Senate for the time being. This would go down as a very famous portion of history, as the people of the Republic saw that the Jedi wore armor in order to liberate many of those affected by the Galactic Civil War. The Jedi would continue to use armor off and on for a couple places afterwards, most notably during the Great Galactic War and then the Cold War that would follow. When the Sith Empire returned though, all bets were off. The last time they dealt with the Sith was Exar Kun, Revan, and Nihilus, as they were all in the lineup of only a 60-year time period. These powerful Dark Lords in such quick succession left the Jedi Order completely a mess, but they would raise up yet again, as they could not let an entire army of Sith threaten the Republic. Specialized Jedi armor was crafted and then donned. It wasn't meant to represent a militaristic identity per se, but rather for the Jedi to signify that they were the living shields of the Republic. They would protect innocents even if they had to throw their own chest in the way. But of course, that meaning would fade with time, as the 30-year-long war would drag endlessly on. Soon, Jedi and Sith on both sides began to experiment with their armor. They would create lethal modifications, armor plating, enchantments to improve the strength, and the Jedi and Sith alike became obsessed with war. They would even make their lightsabers more deadly in combat, tuning them to be more lethal. The Jedi of this era would walk a dangerous line, until they would eventually walk it back once the Great Galactic War was concluded. After this, the Jedi put a complete end to all armored developments, believing that they were going down a dark path. But another war would soon come. The new Sith Wars. In this era, the Jedi Lords were the ones in charge and taking the fight to the Brotherhood of Darkness led by Lord Khan. The Jedi General Hoth was renowned for his battlefield expertise and wore armor to represent his militaristic achievement. During the long war of attrition that became the Ruusan campaign, Jedi General Hoth's Army of Light and Lord Khan's Brotherhood of Darkness would both wear armor for far more practical reasons. The environment was hostile, and the death toll of both sides was getting exceptionally high. So bad, in fact, that the Jedi were shipping barely trained young ones and Padawans to the front lines of war. This is where the stigma against the Jedi training younglings ultimately began, as General Hoth resorted to literal child soldiers in order to stop the Sith. Once the entire conflict was ended with the Thought Bomb, the planet of Ruusan was completely devastated. The entire Sith Order, save for Darth Bane, were completely extinct, and the 100 Jedi, including General Hoth, were all killed in the explosion. This had been a nightmare for the Jedi. Following the horrors of this single campaign, in 1000 BBY, the Senate would officially pass a vote, and would vote on the bill known as the Ruusan Reformation. This called for the Army of Light to be completely disbanded, and ordered the Jedi to never create a formalized military ever again. Because of this, the Jedi needed to rebuild their reputation, to regain the trust of the Republic, and because of that, they would put down their armor and move on, which they ultimately planned to be a permanent resolution. But we've been talking about the Jedi for a long time. Let's go back to the Sith. Darth Bane was the last Sith to wear armor in this period of time, and that was due to the Orbalisk attachment to his body. But eventually, the Orbalisk would be removed, and Bane would later wear either dark robes or expensive clothing, that which maintained his public persona as an eccentric but reclusive aristocrat. His apprentice Zana often wore a body-tight suit with a cloak, which allowed her to have more range of motion and be agile. This made sense for her since she was often Bane's field agent for getting things done on behalf of the Sith, and she needed to be quick. The new era of Sith was that their style had completely changed. They would put down their armor, and this would officially mark the entrance of a brand new age. The philosophy of the Sith evolved, and so did their approach to the dark side. No longer were they overlords bent on conquest, but they were to become bankers, aristocrats, scientists, and politicians. The armor of the past represented strength and dominion, but now the Sith were humbled and admitted that they had grown weak and had absolutely no right to rule because of that inherent weakness. War with the lightsaber would never work against the Jedi, and the iron-fisted rule would have to wait. For 1,000 years, the Sith wore their black monk-like robes to become creatures of the night, beings that lurked in the dark, humbled but hungry, awaiting to devour the Republic. In canon, we want to briefly mention Chimere, as technically he would be the first Sith in the Rule of Two era to wear armor in a very long time, but it was entirely for a practical reason. Chimere used cortosis to disable the Jedi lightsabers, but he's more of an outlier in this philosophy. The idea of the Sith being completely changed is even represented by Darth Maul. Maul did not wear armor when he went to Naboo especially. He preferred more freedom of motion since his combat style was acrobatic. But Maul also represented that the Sith had returned, and that they had evolved. They were different than before. They didn't come down with an armada to retake Korriban such as Darth Malgus did in the ancient days. They came as a single Zabrak to kill a single Jedi, to deliver a single message. Your order is blind. We have returned, and your reckoning is on the horizon. When the Clone Wars began, many Jedi began wearing pieces of clone trooper armor with the symbol of the Jedi Order stamped on it. Around the beginning, Obi-Wan and Anakin in particular didn't just wear gauntlets, but also entire chest pieces, shoulder pauldrons, and coverings, as well as boots. At one point early in the war, Obi-Wan wore an entire white set of clone armor, and even would don a clone helmet. Doing this specifically during the Battle of Munalist. Obi-Wan and Anakin's choice to go all in on the clone armor was meant to show camaraderie to their fellow soldiers. They were more to them than just clones. They were more than exposable. They were not cannon fodder, and their generals were one of them, despite being Jedi. But as the war continued, the Jedi began wearing less and less armor, eventually eschewing this practice altogether. They felt that the Order was losing sight of their purpose as peacekeepers and becoming more like soldiers. And the Jedi yet again humbled themselves with simple tan tunics. But unfortunately, the damage was already done. Their arrogance was inflated, and the citizens of the Republic saw this and began to fear the Jedi. But now we reach Darth Sidious, who for most of his life wore a simple black cloak. Palpatine is an individual valued uniformity, and he was on record as stating that he did not like the frills and colors of the Naboo fashion, nor did he care for the glamour and dressing to impress as a politician. This set him apart as unlike most rulers and emperors of old. Palpatine didn't present as some kingly being. He wore a simple black robe and used it to deceive, intimidate, and command those around him. In many ways, because of this, the Republic actually viewed him as humble and meek. However, in reality, he was a black void. He was impossibly wise and powerful, and he had no need for armor, and he had no need for a lightsaber. Everything Palpatine laid eyes on was his, and those that stood against him would be brought to their knees under his power. But all of that would end with his return, and the Dark Empire saga. Here, a Palpatine who had essence transferred his spirit into a younger clone body would wear a black cloak, but without a hood, and for the first time, had armor on his arms and his legs. He had come back from the dead, and was not going to waste time undermining the New Republic's bureaucracy. He had done that for 30 years in his youth, only for it to fail. But now he had returned. He was no longer a frail old man. He did not rely on subterfuge. He was young, strong. All of the vast amounts of power he possessed could now be used to its full potential, in a body that he hoped could handle it. He wasn't trying to politically manipulate his enemies. He was coming at them with full force, with his super weapons known as World Devastators, and a new army. He would wield a lightsaber once again, and in order to display all of this, he adopted a look that represented his militaristic mindset. Hence, why the Sith armor was needed once more. This was Palpatine's declaration of war against the Jedi and against the New Republic. He was no longer a creature of the night as Darth Plagueis had described them. He was truly a leader. Perhaps he was even a god, or at least he would like to think of himself as that. And that, my friends, was the history and explanation of the Sith's relationship with armor. If you watched all the way to the end of this very long holocron, we appreciate you sincerely, and thank you for sticking with us. Some of these smaller aspects of the lore aren't always explained in great detail, but we hope you found this breakdown as fascinating as we did researching it. And again, please tell us other comments you would like to see made into full holocrons in the future. As always, my friends, thank you so much for visiting the archives with us here today, and we hope to see you again soon.